Welcome to Popcorn Psychology, the podcast where we watch blockbuster movies and psychoanalyze them. My name is Brittany Brownfield, and I'm a child therapist, and I'm joined by
Ben Stover, individual therapist.
Hannah Espinoza, marriage and family therapist.
We're all licensed clinical professional counselors, also known as therapists, who practice out of Chicago. Even though we are licensed mental health professionals, this podcast is purely for entertainment purposes and to fulfill our love of dissecting pop culture in all forms.
Please remember that even though we are all licensed therapists, we aren't your therapist.
If you are struggling with mental health symptoms, please find a local mental health provider.
So, I'm really excited today because we're going to be talking about one of my favorite movies from as long ago as when I was a child, Terminator 2. Yes, we are skipping entirely over the first movie and getting to the second one, which in my opinion is better than the first one. Which I think is a wildly held opinion that it's one of the few times when the sequel outpaces the original.
Immediately.
Yes. And all you really have to know about this movie is that there is a young woman named Sarah Connor who, when she's like, it must have been 18 or 19, gets told that she's going to birth basically the robot apocalyptic messiah. And then because of that, over the years, she has been subject to violence and all that stuff while raising her son John, who's supposed to grow up to be this big old tough old warrior person. So as we introduce in this movie, we're introduced to someone who is in a mental health facility. It seems like a criminal for the criminally, they probably said criminally insane back then. It was 91.
I'm sure they did.
Yeah. So as we're introduced to these characters in this movie, Sarah has been in and out of the state pretty much. And John, her son, is now 10 and in foster care. So today we're going to be talking about schizoaffective disorder. We're also going to be talking about all the sort of mental health treatment, basically do's and don'ts we see in this movie and what we would do differently. As always, we can't not talk about, what's our word? Trauma. And then with John, we're going to be talking about the way he presents in this movie, both as a child who is seeking some sort of parent. Mm-hmm. And then also someone who displays a lot of what we call in the field like normalized criminal behavior.
Yes.
So right away when we're introduced to Sarah, they say in the movie that she is diagnosed with acute schizoaffective disorder, which is a diagnosis we have never talked about on this podcast before, I don't think. Which is impressive because we've talked about a lot of diagnoses at this point on the podcast.
We have talked about a lot, and schizoaffective is one that we have all worked with quite acutely.
Yes.
Given our work in community mental health.
Yes.
Absolutely.
But it's also a diagnosis that Ben reminded us before we started recording that we as licensed clinical professional counselors would not diagnose ourselves in our office. This is one of those diagnoses we would send off to a psychiatrist to have them diagnose.
Correct. Mm-hmm. You need a clinical psychologist or a psychiatrist to provide a diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder or anything on the psychotic spectrum.
Mm-hmm. So really quickly, I'm just going to do the psychoeducational portion, and I'm going to talk about the criteria of schizoaffective disorder according to the DSM. So basically, someone with schizoaffective disorder has to meet the primary criteria for schizophrenia. So that includes two or more of the following: delusions, hallucinations, disorganized speech, like speech that is easily disrailed or derailed or is incoherent, grossly disorganized or catatonic behavior, and then negative symptoms, which isn't like negative like sad, it's negative like absence of. So their face is flat, they don't move a lot, their speech can be very also like drawn out too.
Monotone.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then, but schizoaffective must also include at least two of the following symptoms of a mood disorder as well. So they have to have major mood episode, either a major depressive or mania that lasts for an uninterrupted period of time, and the delusions or hallucinations for 2 or more consecutive weeks without mood symptoms sometime during the life of the illness. And then mood symptoms are present for the majority of the illness, and the symptoms aren't caused by substance use. So what I think is interesting is I think people know about schizophrenia. People sometimes know about mood disorders with psychosis, but I don't think a lot of people know that schizoaffective disorder even exists.
No, probably not. I think a lot of people would particularly early students would want to diagnose somebody who presents with schizoaffective disorder as having schizophrenia and then also having a mood disorder without understanding that there is an entire diagnostic classification that can cover that. But schizoaffective, as you may have guessed from how Brittany described it, is one of the ones that can be tricky to diagnose, which is why it requires a doctorate to do that, because it needs a careful assessment of understanding what is causing the psychosis, and is the psychosis primary, or does the psychosis only occur when the mood symptoms are active? Because you can have depression, major depressive disorder, or bipolar disorder with a severe specifier that also has with psychotic features specifier to it. And the difference is that the people who have a mood disorder or a mood disorder with psychotic features, the psychotic features are only active when the mood disorder is severe. People who have schizoaffective disorder will have psychosis present all the time and also have mood disorder episodes present. And that's the difference. And then also this population who has that are going to likely have substance abuse issues in their history. And it's really difficult to suss out when these things are happening and which one is which. Because people can also seek to use medications and drugs to suppress constant psychoses that are creating really difficult struggles in their life.
No, for sure. Yeah, I mean, the way I kind of think about it, which is how we talked about before we started recording, is that schizoaffective is like the psychosis is kind of the dominant thing and the mood kind of follows behind it or is pumped up with it. And then with bipolar or depression with psychosis, it's like the mood comes on and then the psychotic features come along with that. And so I think with Sarah, it makes sense, given the world of the movie in which they don't believe what she's saying is real, that she is psychosis forward. And that she's constantly talking about these delusions about I birthed like the robot messiah. We are in constant danger, like the paranoia that she exhibits, and how adamant she is about that. Like they have all these, they show us in the movie, like the video where she's like screaming at them about the death to come.
Right. We see her so distressed and activated, and these people don't know what they don't know. That she's telling the truth. And so from a clinical perspective, we'll talk about their treatment of her in a second, but their the diagnostic presentation, it makes sense why they would ascribe schizoaffective disorder to her, because she's showing constant psychoses, but having mood episodes
as well,
but the mood episodes are intermittent. So realistically speaking, on that aspect of mental health, they probably actually did their homework when they were coming up with what diagnostic label Sarah might have with these scenes in the hospital, because I think clinically I agree that that's probably what they would think.
I was like genuinely surprised to hear them say schizoaffective, because you're right, that is very well thought through. Like I think typically in these kinds of movies they would just say she's schizophrenic or she's a psychotic disorder. They would just say something flashier and not necessarily use a genuine psychiatric term that not a lot of people know about.
Right. If you're not outside of the field, you probably never heard these words put together before.
Yeah, absolutely.
But she probably would be given that, given, like we said, the omnipresence of this belief. And even in her sessions with Silverman, she's talking to him and he's like, yeah, Sarah, I just don't believe you don't believe that. I think you're very smart and you're telling me what you think I want to hear. And I just don't believe it. And we're going to have to keep you here for a little while longer.
Ugh, that guy.
I mean, that interaction wasn't tremendously inappropriate. It's the things he said to his colleagues, I think, that got really inappropriate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, I think his interactions with her were okay.
Well, I feel like we're already getting there, so we might as well just talk about the mental health treatment we see in this movie. This is one of the few movies we watch where we actually get to see mental health treatment occur. And boy, howdy, is it not good.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
It is terrifying, and it probably lends to some of the stigma of what people think will happen when they get recommended for hospitalization or told they have to go, that they think they're going to go somewhere where they're going to be treated like Sarah Connor was. They're going to go to a state psychiatric hospital that's probably a prison facility, basically, and that's the way they're going to be treated. Now, I can't speak to the way people might have been treated in 1991.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Unfortunately.
I know a lot of the facilities like that in our state closed maybe 10 years after that. Or 15.
Okay.
But a lot of the state-run mental health facilities that would have looked like that place closed. And there were lots of allegations that they were not so great places that were built long ago in the 60s. Like Tinley Park Mental Health Center, for example.
Okay. Just like, yeah, just straight up prison. That's what I just kept thinking when I was watching it. This is basically a prison. Just like the coldness of the place, the fact that the orderlies are all carrying like bullet clubs, basically, batons.
Nightsticks.
Yeah. That they're like also doing that very like sinister guard behavior of like whacking the nightstick along all the walls so people can't sleep. You know, licking her face. Like that one orderly is obviously not a good person and is abusing the power of his position.
Yeah, he is a villain. I mean, you see that. But, you know, people who had been clients in places similar to that had been known to report behavior like that. And we learned from the Stanford prison experiment that human behavior that goes unchecked and falls under specific roles will dehumanize other humans really fast.
Yeah.
And it gets really scary. But watching that get shown in such a popular movie, an Oscar-winning film, I can't imagine the damage it continues to have, given that Terminator is still so in the zeitgeist that people go like, no, I don't want to go to a place like that where they're going to put me in a stark white room and
a cell. People are gawking at me like a fish in a bowl.
Right. Behind a thick glass window, that people are going to be talking about me behind a little speaker in the wall. Yeah, the treatment we see Sarah get is not great.
No.
Silverman is showing a lot of mixed signals. He's at best neutral with her. And we see that he is showing off sometimes for his students or colleagues that he's treating.
Absolutely.
And that's not okay. Like what he's sitting in the room with her, the way he's asking her questions, it's almost like he's trying to write a book with her story or build up his own brand, kind of like we saw in the Rob Zombie Halloween that they had Loomis do, where he was writing a book and speaking about his work with Michael Myers, which was also super unethical.
I mean, I think that's a common trope in movies. Like we were also talking about Silence of the Lambs before we started recording too, of like there being like a main psychiatrist who seems to be just like treating the person in their care as at best a science experiment or a topic for a book, something that's going to be their agenda that makes them famous or doing something for them. Because I think, if nothing else, he's never demonstrating patient-centered care with her. Like even in that like interrogation footage that he showed to her later when she was in a more like quote unquote lucid state from his perspective, the fact that he's like, tell me the dream again, and she's like, I have the same dream every day. Like, why? You know, it's just, I mean, the whole environment, like if we're just going to talk about the quote unquote session they had, if you even want to call it a session, like the fact that it's in basically an interrogation room, the fact that they're orderlies milling around with their nightsticks while she's supposed to be open. I mean, I think the only quote unquote good thing that she gets out of those is they let her smoke cigarettes while she does it, right?
Yeah.
But other than that, like he doesn't come at her from a place of belief, you know, even though she's presenting well. He does that thing also that I can't stand that mental health professionals do in movies, which is like act like they're lie detectors.
Yeah.
Like I know when you're lying. You know, because the things that she brings up, like I know he has a history with her,
Yes.
but the things that she brings up are real things. Like, I'm trying to do well because I want to see my son. You know, I have a goal in mind. Like, I know we know, because we know the world of the movie, that she is bullshitting, you know, what they want to see. But I would say, like, viewing her as a client, I can't necessarily look at somebody and think, you'd be like, oh, I think you're bullshitting me, so fuck you.
Yeah, that's not a thing that we can do.
You know, and then having no remorse for how that's going to be upsetting her. Like, obviously her reaction is probably a trauma reaction,
Yes.
but his whole delivery of that I found really distasteful, and I wouldn't do as a clinician, because it's just like, what's supposed to motivate her to be engaged with treatment if when she's quote unquote doing well, you're still like, I don't believe you because I think it's for nefarious purposes, and I'm going to call you out as such and kind of squash your, like, what you're hoping for and what you're working towards with your mental health treatment.
It kind of makes it so she can't win.
Yeah. It's very lose-lose for her. Mm-hmm. If I'm doing well and presenting well and cooperating, they're just going to say I'm bullshitting. And then if I'm presenting more honestly in their perspective, then I'm still very ill and I have to stay where I am.
I think this is where the world of this story gets really tricky.
Yeah.
Because I find myself, having worked for a long time in a residential, I'm a little torn, and I partially disagree with you and partially agree.
Okay.
Like, I find myself like, yes, of course, you don't want to take away people's motivations, and you don't want to use the things that are meaningful to them that had become motivating, contributing factors to their wellness, protective factors, right? You don't want to take those away, but you also want what they're doing to be real and based in reality. Now, depending on what point in their treatment and what their prognosis is, would depend on how you engage with that. What you don't do is tell people that their psychotic perceptions aren't real. Mm-hmm. That you don't do. That's not helpful.
Right.
And that part I agree with you on. Like, he's not doing a good job at all of helping her understand, like, okay, I understand that's very real for you. I don't see them, and I don't have any information on Terminators. Mm-hmm. I don't know anything about them. Mm-hmm. And there are ways to go to have that conversation with the psychotic person who's suffering a psychosis that is empathic without shaming them and going like, you know, I get that was very real for you. I'm not seeing them right now, so. Mm-hmm. And I've never encountered that or heard of them. I imagine that was really terrifying for you, that you felt that way, mm-hmm. without agreeing or disagreeing.
And I agree with that. I guess I'm not thinking of that in the context of the conversation that they have in the movie, because my perception of that conversation is that she's been doing well for a while in an effort
for 6 months.
For 6 months. And so that's why I think what you're bringing up is a valid point. I think that's how he should be always treating her. I would say at this point, she is saying, like, I recognize those were delusions and those weren't real. Like, I recognize that that's not my reality. She's presenting well, quote unquote, according to the history that he's giving us.
Yes.
In the movie. And so the fact that, I think you're right on. I just feel like that's a separate point than what I'm resonating with in terms of that specific interaction. Because I think what's also hard is that we're only seeing like literally a day in this movie. So we don't know, because also, like, I know this was for dramatic effect to introduce the character in this movie. Like, she was like fully doing those like Cape Fear level pull-ups in her room, like not that long ago.
To shreds.
So like,
Yeah, she is.
though she may be thinking that she's been doing the right of the past 6 months, I wonder how much she's still exhibiting behaviors that might be like, ooh. But I think the way that he points all that out, the way he squashes her, I don't know. I think his overall just way that he engages with her is so off-putting. Like, in that I don't feel like he treats her like a person.
Yeah.
I feel like he treats her like a curiosity
Yeah.
and an interesting, curiosity.
study.
Yeah. And so I don't think he really is thinking about how he is making her feel, which is why in that room when he just kind of squashes on her, I'm not getting the feel from him that he's coming at her with compassion.
And that part I agree with you, and I don't think he is. I think where I'm torn is that he does know her. And he is watching her, and as he's established, she has hurt him and assaulted him several times.
That is also true.
And he knows that from giving her chances, that the second she knows she has an advantage or has a way out, that she's gonna try to escape. And she's going to think, so he knows what he's dealing with is persistent and profoundly believed by her. So having watched her past patterns of behavior, I can understand why he would be skeptical. I don't agree with the way he was presenting that to her. I agree with the limit setting and the being forthright that, Sarah, I don't know that I believe you.
Well,
But I don't think it was compassionately delivered, and I don't think it was delivered with any sort of moving forward. This is what I would need to see to believe you, because it's set up like Hannah said, like you can't win, and we don't want that. It's okay to limit set when you're with clients who you feel like are manipulating you, and particularly in facilities like that, people will do that, and that can be part of the illness that they have for them to be doing that. It will not tell you the truth necessarily if you're in a prison facility. So being aware of limit setting that you have to do is challenging, but he could still be operating a way. He's communicating to her. He's actually on her team. He's part of her treatment, not one of her captors. And he does not do a good job of that.
Yeah, I would say he doesn't do a good job of that at all. And I don't like his portrayal, the portrayal that we have of someone who's supposed to be in the field working with people who are severely mentally ill.
No.
Yeah, because also, too, it sounds like my assumption is, maybe this is how they said it, and I just can't remember all like verbatim, is that he proffered this idea of like, if you can behave for 6 months, if you can show progress for 6 months, we'll move you. Like he created like, why does she have this expectation that she can move down to minimal security, that she could have visitation with John? Like that, I'm assuming, was presented to her. So I think that's the part that also feels unfair. Like I dangled this carrot in front of you. You met me there, supposedly. And then I'm saying, oh, well, because you're right, Ben, is that I think what was really missing too was I'm still a little concerned about yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
So like if you can give me 1 more month to kind of see how things are going, and maybe we'll adjust this or we'll adjust that, it's being more clear with her about because this is what I have to do with clients, is like especially when I worked with them in the field, like you were saying, Ben, that were more like psychosis kind of stuff or just more intensive things going on, is where I'd have to be really careful is being very clear about what I was still seeing concretely that made me feel concerned.
Yeah.
Why that was impacting my decision or assessment, and then having to give them hope still, like, and asking, and I think also this is where you have to be always mindful of the power dynamic of like also asking for their patience with me, like, and validating that the information I'm giving them is upsetting potentially, you know. So the way he could have done differently is, I know we talked about this and I know this was the agreement. I still have concerns in these areas because of what I've seen, blah, 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 blah. Or like this thing that happened last week, or the fact that you're still tearing up your room, and bringing up my past injuries, like provoking me basically, which is what she was doing.
Yeah.
And so if we can have another month where this, and this is happening, I would love to revisit this conversation, and I really appreciate you giving me more time. Or I really appreciate you being patient with me. Make them feel like they are an adult. Make them feel like they are part of the conversation and not that you were just dominating them.
Yeah.
Which is like we talked about in these kind of like, especially state-run facilities or facilities run like this, it's so easy to feel like hopeless and helpless, and that the man has their boot on your neck. And then like you're saying, Ben, like, then why wouldn't you lie to them? Why wouldn't you bullshit them?
Right.
Why wouldn't you be trying whatever you could to get out, because it's fucked anyway?
But she is.
Yeah, and so you have to proffer hope and cooperation, like not just them cooperating with you, but it being collaborative.
Yes.
And I think there's more of an emphasis in a facility like that of like compliance and obedience, and that's just fucked.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where, doing mental health treatment in a facility as a physician, where the physician's going to ultimately have the decision on whether or not they're appropriate for lower levels of care, probably shouldn't be the person doing the treatment. And that can be a person sitting and doing assessment with them, but that person probably shouldn't be, the assessor probably shouldn't be the treatment rendering provider at that point.
Because of rapport.
Yeah. And
Absolutely.
because of the ability to separate out the role of assessor from therapist. Again, in my work, I don't have any ability whatsoever to determine whether somebody is appropriate to be at work or not. I have the ability as a clinician to determine if somebody's safe, but I don't have any role in the assessment of fitness for duty.
So you're telling me all those movies you've watched so far where they have to go see the therapist at the police department was not true? Are you telling me that Basic Instinct was not telling us the truth?
Sometimes it's that way. Some places do it that way. So, was Basic Instinct telling the truth? I'll let you decide.
I mean,
No. No, it's not. No, it's a horrible depiction of that, but and breaches of ethics all over everywhere. But it is done that way sometimes, but it's not in Chicago, where the people who assess people's fitness for duty are all outside vendors who don't know these people from anybody else, so that they can have clinical independence and not have any bias in what they're doing. And there's no way Silverman would have that if he's also doing her treatment, which also a psychiatrist would almost never do. So that's a big thing they got wrong. But looking at how important it is when you're working in a difficult setting with difficult clients, particularly it's somewhere where people don't want to be but have to, their top priority is always getting out and getting their life back, as it should be. And there's nothing wrong with that, but being aware of that dynamic in the room and the power differential, and being respectful of that and respectful of the patient or client at all times is important. And I think what we saw in this movie is how to do it poorly, but you still see some limit setting, and telling clients the truth of your assessment, I think, is important. And sometimes clinicians really do shy away from that. As if, like, I have clients who have wanted to do X, Y, or Z treatment, and it's up to me as a provider to provide my assessment of, look, I don't think you're stable enough for that. And I am not comfortable doing this or that direction treatment wise with you at this time, because we're not seeing stability. We're not seeing substance abuse being in a place where it allows you to be regulated. We're not seeing enough X, Y, or Z that I'm comfortable doing that at this time. But here's what I would need to do that.
Well, you're giving context, which we were talking about.
Right, and he doesn't.
Yeah.
He's just like, I don't believe you.
And then he's also like finger wag at her when she has an outburst about this news. It's very like circular, the situation.
It
for
is.
her. And also too, just like, I wonder what you guys think too, but like showing her the videotape of her in like distress, like playing that back for her. I know that's for the film of it all, like exposition dumping and like setting the scene. But I feel like that would be really triggering for a client, unless they wanted to do that, or unless like you had a conversation with the clinical reasoning for like showing them an old tape.
Yeah, I don't really know what the significance of that would be, or how that would be helpful, especially because if it's helpful, it would only be helpful in showing that she's not like that anymore.
Yeah.
In this last 6 months. But I don't know what the goal would be of showing someone a video of themselves when they're in clear distress in the way that she is.
I don't know in this context
Yeah.
what use it would have had. I think if she were denying that she did that and that were a profuse stumbling block, that could be a useful thing to go like, I wouldn't force it on them, but like, we do have security footage of what happened the last time when, you did get restrained and medicated, and, we could, if you would like to see so that we can be on the same page, I'd be happy to show you. But it wouldn't just go, and here's all your shit.
Yeah. Can you just, zone out through the window as I make you listen to this like traumatizing video? Because I would agree. Like I would maybe do something like that with the client. I would also do it if they were in denial of their progress. Like I think because therapy is so day to day or week to week for people, there can be a lack of perspective on how far they've come. So sometimes with clients, I'll say, can I read you back something you had said like 6 months ago to as like a positive thing.
No,
it's
absolutely.
like, see how far you've come.
I do similar stuff with clients to help, and also having discussions with them sometimes of what you said, Ben, of letting them know, I don't think you're ready for us to do that yet. I understand that you want to get through this and that you are working really hard. And I don't think that you're ready for the turmoil that is going to get stirred up when we get to this place.
Bingo.
And and a part of my job is to help make sure that you're not re-traumatized if I can avoid it. And this is a part of, this decision, what we're talking about right now is a part of that.
Like seeing John again, like that's a big deal. Based on like the hallucinations, the delusions that she's verbalizing.
And how John is and how he's going to react to her.
Little buddy.
I mean, no mother wants to be apart from their son. You're going to separate her from the son again, which, she may be used to now and understand, but she may have a primal reaction to. And, Hannah, I am certain you have these kinds of conversations with people even more than I do, because with trauma treatment, sometimes people are like, I want to get into the trauma. And I'm like, I want to get into the trauma with you too. But if you're not safe, it's not going to be helpful. And we're just going to dysregulate you further.
Yep.
I tell people there's no doing therapy so hard and so good that you win therapy or you do therapy quicker. I tell people, I get the inclination to like get to it or like to push.
Yes.
Because we're putting like more of like a medical model mindset or like a hustle culture mindset onto therapy.
Yeah.
Capitalistic mindset onto therapy.
Yeah.
But like, it's going to eat itself. Like it's going to have like a net negative.
Right. If you're outside of your window of tolerance, it's going to be net unhelpful. Like it's okay to get dysregulated in session so long as you know you're safe and can re-regulate. But if I think you are showing a pattern of dysregulation outside of therapy, that things we talk about in therapy then become massive dysregulation points for you in your life, you're not safe, and you're not going to believe you're safe when talking about these things. And I bet Hannah has to have that conversation with people about couples therapy far more often than I have to have that with trauma work.
Yeah, that would be accurate.
Absolutely. No, I want to bring my husband or wife in, and we want to talk about this, and I want to bring my partner in, and we want to talk about this, and go like about this affair in particular.
And we have to discuss what are the boundaries of how we're going to be able to talk about something. And it might be something where I split them up. It might be something, there's just so many different ways to help people without having to re-traumatize them. And people aren't aware that that's what can happen, nor do they understand the implications of what that can feel like.
Right.
And not because they're dumb or something, but just because it's not something that's talked about. As we've discussed many times, there's not any mental health education in this country, and it's just not something that's talked about very much.
It is not. And, with couples that are having affairs, you also want to split them up, because the first and foremost question, going back to my point about is it safe, that needs to be asked is, are you still engaging in an affair? Because if the answer to that is in any way yes, we are not doing couples therapy. Full stop, period. No.
Absolutely. Absolutely, because the goal of doing couples therapy is working on the relationship. And if one person is already outside of the relationship, no work can be done. And there's nothing more frustrating as a couples therapist than having one person who's outside the marriage who has no intention of coming back into it. It doesn't go anywhere. It's very frustrating and it doesn't go anywhere. Mm-hmm. And it's not helpful and it's really stressful as a therapist.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Or having people not tell you the truth, as our friend Brittany has encountered before, famously.
Yeah. But I would say I want to kind of to go back to one thing you had said before I poo-pooed all over you, Ben, was that when you are talking to someone who you do believe is experiencing active psychosis, which I guess Silverman does think that, if we're gonna like live in the world of his perspective.
Oh, he doesn't believe her for a second.
Then the way he is talking about, like you were saying, Ben, the way that he is dealing with her as someone who he believes is an active psychosis is bad. It's not the way you do it.
It's stupid.
And because Hannah and I were on the same...
It's dysregulating. Go ahead, Brittany.
Yeah. Because Hannah and I were on the same community support team. So we actually worked with the same clients in the field. And a lot of them had active psychosis to varying degrees. Mm-hmm. Not like usually managed enough that they could live in the world independently.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
people with schizoaffective can exist quite peacefully and have productive lives.
Yep. Which people don't think is true. And
catastrophically false.
Yeah.
They most certainly can do just fine. They might have conversations with themselves as they're walking around, but they're not going to hurt or bother anybody. Mm-hmm.
And so one thing that I'm thinking of, one client in particular, I wonder if Hannah, you know who I'm thinking of, and they had active psychosis probably every time we saw them.
Yeah.
And the approach we took with that person, and the approach you're supposed to take, and this is where you were going, Ben, is you do not argue with them, or you do not try to like talk them out of it or make them feel stupid or wrong, or be like, you'll just get into a power struggle argument that's going to dysregulate them.
Yeah.
You know, but like, I don't like, what are you talking about? There's nobody upstairs. Like, there's nobody following you. Like, it's demeaning. It's enraging on their part because that's their world experience. Mm-hmm. And also like, they really are hearing and seeing it. So it's like,
yes,
what is me telling them that's not happening going to do for them? Because that's not true for them. And so I rhymed accidentally. And so what we would do, and this is what you were saying, Ben, is we would just, because they would, in this situation I'm thinking of, they would ask us a lot too, like, can't you hear it as well? So this kind of put us in this tricky spot of like wanting us to affirm
just
somebody all the time.
Just someone, I think we are thinking of the same person, Brittany, just someone who wanted the validation that they weren't alone.
Yeah. And so what we would say a lot, or what us as the team would say a lot, which is I think the standard way you're supposed to engage, is, I know that you're hearing it. And I know that that's blank or that's scary or whatever, like validating them, because that is their experience. And I would just say, honestly, I honestly can't tell you that I'm hearing it because I'm not. And that doesn't mean that you're not hearing it. Mm-hmm. And so you actually lean into it, which I think is, and I thought that was counterintuitive before I did this work. And so I would imagine listening, it'd be a wild thing you're hearing us say, but you don't pump it up. Like, you don't go, oh man, wow, like how many are you, like, you know what I mean? Like, you don't like get in, like, you don't get rapidly engaged in the delusion with them, but you don't, like, you're not doing them a disservice by trying to convince them otherwise.
No.
Unless they're open to being convinced.
Which they're not.
Yeah.
No one is open to being convinced that their perception isn't reality.
Especially when they're experiencing consistent psychosis.
Right.
Yeah.
Which makes Sarah a really difficult patient. And I mean, I've sat in the classes, and now one of my buddies, Dwiggins, I'm going to call you out because you listen to our show, so I know you hear this and probably appreciate this, but it is an actor who is working on training officers in crisis intervention work with crisis intervention team work. And they have officers who are given this training by people who have either survived or had family members who are survived, who are either actors or community members who are in recovery from illness, who try to teach them how to respond to people in illnesses. And they will tell them all of the same things we're saying right now, which this doctor in this movie did not demonstrate, which is that you don't mock them.
Yes.
You don't have a mocking stance, even anywhere remotely in your mind. You don't invalidate them. You also don't agree with them. Like Brittany said, you don't need to affirm things that aren't true. You don't have to agree or disagree. You can just say, like, I hear you say that that's real for you and it's scary or it's upsetting, and I get why that is. I'm not hearing it right now, and I don't have the same knowledge base you do. I have never heard of or encountered a Terminator before. I haven't. I don't know anything about that, but I get that that's real for you, and that has been a life-changing, scary experience. And I don't have to agree that that's real or not. That's irrelevant, because perception is reality. So she perceived it. It's real to her. And I, as a clinician, have to understand that. And we don't see people do that in this film at all. But this feels like a good spot for us to take a break.
Yeah, because I think one thing that's not acknowledged at all in this movie is what? Trauma. In that, regardless, like, the way that Sarah has become institutionalized, is because of these major events. And there seems to be no curiosity, no interest in the impact of how she got in those positions and what the impact that might have been on her. And there's no consideration of how they are also re-traumatizing her all the time in this space. Like, not just the way that they are dealing with her, like Silverman and the orderlies, but also just the entire environment. I mean, that's what's so hardcore about these kind of institutions, and why a lot of them have been shut down, is because the way that they engage with patients, like you see in the movie, like as they're walking down the hallway in the beginning, they're like dragging someone down the hallway. Like, it's aggression forward. And I used to work, and you might have had this experience too, Ben, working residential, but I worked in 2 different places where we were trained to do holds. So when someone is out of control or trying to harm themselves or someone else, where you are trained to keep them safe by holding onto their body.
Yep.
And there's very specific ways, and granted, I didn't learn this stuff till like in the 2010s, so way after this movie. There's ways that I was trained to hold people to not just do the minimal amount of damage to myself and them, like from a physical standpoint, but also there was a lot of awareness of like how do holds re-traumatize clients. And like, for example, because I worked in a field where there was a lot of sexual trauma, there was always a lot of emphasis on you don't put someone in a hold lying down if you can help it, because they might have experienced like being held down and on their stomachs or on their backs. And so it was always like, if you had to put them on the ground, sit them on the ground, and then 2 people be on the other side of them, just like calmly holding their arms, and maybe someone's holding their legs if need be. Granted, I mostly worked with like teenagers and kids, but some of them could be quite big. Like the teenagers were definitely bigger than me a lot of the times. But the fact that she is in this environment too, that has got to be actively re-traumatizing her, putting her in a position where there is an us and them. There are people that are aggressors towards her. And how could she not then respond in a fight way back to them? Because they don't seem to be viewing her at all from a trauma perspective.
They're not.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely not.
I mean, and I think that's the whole setting, though. The whole setting doesn't seem very trauma focused at all.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah.
And under no point are we considering that Sarah would have watched her roommate or learned of. I don't think she saw it. I think she was told, right? She was told at the police station that Ginger was killed, her roommate.
Oh, from the first movie.
Yeah.
I was like, the roommate in the hospital.
And that she was on the list of a victim of what appeared to be a serial killer.
Yeah, several Sarah Connors were murdered the night in the first movie. So also, like, that's traumatizing, if nothing else, being tracked down. So I think that fact too, that they weren't like connecting any of those dots.
Well, they know, but they know all this. Like, there is video of the guy she described.
Yeah.
Like, the guy she described is real, so they know somebody like that because that person did go through the police station. There is footage of that.
They were interrogating her in the movie, and they were like, this is connected to that guy.
Right. So all of that, they know that she did go through a traumatic experience that was real. The part they don't believe is that it was a robot.
Sure.
They don't believe it was a robot from the future, a killer robot from the future, and that they sent back a soldier who impregnated her. which is wild.
Sounds like a book I'd read.
It sounds like a fan fiction you'd write about Bucky Barnes.
He is part machine.
Which part, Brittany?
One of the important parts.
But I'm turning Brittany red right now. The thing I think that's important about is nobody considers what that would have been like to her to have been in that police station, watching someone come in with weapons like that. That body armor does not stop.
Yeah.
And watch a number of officers murdered in front of her who were supposed to be there to keep her safe, and her finally believing she was safe, only to have the Terminator pull, "I'll be back," and drive in and then murder everyone. Did he kill like 35 officers or something?
I mean, he like torpedoed basically a whole police department.
Right. That was bad. And then going on and on and on throughout, chasing her, like, just to even look at basic human compassion. What would that have been like for her?
She's also only 29. So those things all happened to her when she was 19.
Right.
18. Because John had to cook for 9 months. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Right. She was like 19 years old, working in like a fast food restaurant as a waitress. Mm-hmm. Like, I think, was she on roller skates? Like,
I mean,
like
it was very cutesy apron energy, diner energy.
But she was not making money. Yeah. And this wasn't like a advanced point in her life. She was very developmentally underdeveloped yet in teenage years, and watching her suffer the immense amounts of trauma she would have gone through and have that be completely ignored is therapeutically irresponsible. Just go like, oh no, she's schizoaffective, we need to medicate her. Like, hold on.
Because even though they acknowledge with like the interrogations and stuff in this movie, they still act as if she's making everything up.
Right.
Like, they're like, it's like she's getting the shit end of the stick in both ways of like, so you agree that somebody was after me and that I was amongst this horrible situation, but yet you're not treating any of the real effect that would have on me. You're just hyper focused on the delusional narrative that I have around it, as if this didn't really happen though, like the destruction part of it.
Right.
It's like she can't win for losing.
And part of the thing they're also holding over her is her lack of successful cooperation on identifying this guy with the detectives or the FBI.
So I wonder if some of this is old school punitive kind of shit.
It could be, but looking at it with the lack of motivation the system would have to cooperate with somebody that they feel is withholding information on officers getting killed is not going to have been great in 1991, if ever. Mm-hmm. And that's a factor too.
Yeah, which probably does not help their compassion towards her.
No.
Yeah.
So,
especially if they think she is a accomplice of that person, which I kind of feel like that's how they treat her.
Yeah.
Or think of her.
Well, they don't know what. I don't remember if they acknowledged that Kyle Reese existed. I don't remember. I know they talked to her about Reese, but I don't know if they just labeled him like a drifter or whatever.
I can't remember.
Because they invalidate her about Reese in some way, shape, or form, and are like really focused on Arnold.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But it's still like picking and choosing from the situation. Because she's someone that, as I'm watching it, like is clearly just going through like PTSD, if anything.
Yes.
Because like we see multiple times in the movie, I mean, she has a lot of criteria. She has nightmares about the events in question and the events upcoming. Intrusive thoughts, fight or flight and freeze. We see her do a lot of those. I think we see her do most, like all three of those throughout the movie.
Yep.
Yeah.
Dissociates.
Yep.
That's frankly what he's calling her on when he's sitting with her. I don't believe she's dissociating, and he can see it. Like, you're dissociating right now. He doesn't say that. He could have handled that in a more compassionate way, like we covered, but she is exhibiting all of the symptoms of PTSD, and to ignore that as a possible consideration is flat irresponsible. And I wish I would say it probably wouldn't be done, but it would be, and it has been, and happens to people all the time, that we just go like, oh, well, they have all these psychotic symptoms. Like, have you considered the fact of what going through any of this might have been like for them?
Absolutely.
And with Sarah, the other thing I wanted to think about is how on earth do we conceptualize that she's telling the truth, that this is all real, and the things that she knows about and knows are happening have been validated by the presence of an actual killer robot from the future trying to kill her.
Well, I just can't imagine how dysregulating it would be in a way that we do not have a diagnosis for, to know an inherent truth that everyone does not agree with. Like the Twilight Zone effect of like, I know something is true and no one else agrees with me. No one else understands me. No one else gets it.
Right. Like when you want to be like, I fucking told you. Mm-hmm. I told you. Mm-hmm. This was the truth. And you don't believe me. And every time you ask me, I have been telling you the truth. Mm-hmm. But you keep asking me for what the truth is and telling me that the truth isn't the truth. But I'm telling you the truth. I don't have another truth because that's truth.
Well, and also she's stuck in this like unfortunate position where because she's nailing it in her worldview, she's prevented the situations from happening. So even now after this movie, the people in charge, quote unquote, can still say like, you're a terrorist or something, like, because it still hasn't happened. What you're saying has happened. And they'll just, chit chat away all the banana stuff.
Well, right. She's been preparing for the reality she knows is coming. Mm-hmm. And because other people don't have any context for it, they assume that all of her behaviors to gather weapons and rob banks and steal and do all the things that she's done are based out of illness instead of based out of reality prepping. Like, the world is going to end. This is what's going to happen. It's going to happen on this date, and this is what's going to be the results of it. If you believed that, really believed that, and had evidence proving it to you, why would you re-engage with normal life with people who are just going about their little jobs and planning for what vacations they're going to take when you're like, you're all going to die in 6 years?
Yeah.
God, I don't care.
Because she hasn't been going back to like the episode we just recorded, Everything Ever All at Once. Like her meaning is very separate from the meaning of the day-to-day person.
Yes.
And yeah, I mean, it's making me think of another movie, which I don't think we've even talked about doing for this podcast, but I also love this movie, is 12 Monkeys. And it's the same thing where Bruce Willis's character knows what's going to happen, tries to tell people, and gets thrown into a mental institution, like an old school style one too, in the 90s. So very similar, because it is a wild, like you're saying, Ben, it's a wild context to really like wrap your head around. I did have a supervisor once when I was brand new to the field who did tell me, I think she believed in like ghosts and stuff. So when she was prepping me about like clients we'd work with that like saw things, she would always be like, but you never know, maybe they are seeing something. And I think about that all the time. And I was like, all right.
Well, and I mean, I've encountered clients who very much believe in spirits and ghosts, and for some clients that I have, it's culturally appropriate to do so because it's how they explain things within their culture, and it's across several cultures. It's not just like you can figure out which one I'm talking about by subtext. I'm not going to give that to you, but it's several cultures, and it happens. It's common for people to believe that they see people after death, that spirits visit them, or that spirits are part of their life, or ghosts, whatever, all kinds of things. And who am I to say what's true? It's been a phenomenon that's been reported across human existence since forever. So I think the point of supervisors telling us those things and reminding us those is that even though we have these fancy educations, it's important to listen to clients, because even the most fantastical stories that we hear might be the truth.
Yeah. Also, I think because she believed in ghosts, my supervisor. And as Hannah knows, I have a deal with the spiritual world, which is I'll crack this third eye open, but I ain't seen no ghosts. So I guess that means I also believe in ghosts.
You definitely
But
do.
I was raised Catholic, which I think what you're speaking to, Ben, that is a culture.
Yes.
in which it is normal to believe in the spirit world, to believe in angels, to believe in ghosts, to believe in like Ouija board demons. Like you're supposed to not do any of that stuff. But that is, I think people think like it's a far-fetched thing, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And they think we're talking about like indigenous people or like whatever. But
Nope.
like Catholics, Christians, a lot of mainstream religions believe in stuff like that too. Just because it's normalized and they made, CBS shows called Touched by an Angel doesn't mean that it's another version of believing in the supernatural that is very normalized and culturally handed down.
Or aliens,
Oh yeah.
How
I
do
watch
you-
enough I watch enough episodes of Ancient Aliens in a row, babe, and I am fully convinced.
I've been
Puts
to
a
a lot
spell
of
on me.
I've been to a lot of those sites. I am not convinced in the slightest that was not done by human hands.
Oh. Yes.
So, and the locals there very much detest that viewpoint. They detest it, particularly in Peru. They show you the tools, they show you the handiwork. Like, some of those things that they showed where the work is so precise. Like, I accept a little more of the argument, but on a lot of those things, when you actually go to the site, like I've been to.
Is this
Machu
you introducing a side podcast you're going to do about aliens?
No, I'm more on team that it's disrespectful to the accomplishments of ancient civilizations
agreed.
and people's heritage than it is
Yes.
attributing to aliens, and that I don't like that. I get why they were upset with it. I didn't ask them stupid questions, but they could tell
They were sick of it?
since that show came out.
Oh,
That-
1,000%.
I'm more on teams of that goofy guy Giorgio with his goofy hair, where the meme somebody made of him is, "Why is water clear? Because aliens are colorblind."
Oh my God.
Because aliens, but like recognizing that yes, these cultural values like Santeria exists in people that are Catholic, and that has some very different beliefs. Voodoo is believed by a lot of people, and who are any of us to tell people what's true and what's not, especially if perception is reality, and also supernatural has existed or supernatural experiences have existed throughout human history. So for clinicians, it's important to remember that how someone interprets something is still real to them, and it's disrespectful of us to assume that that's psychotic.
Yeah. Because I think how it would more present in this movie is if I was working with John and he told me all about this stuff.
Yeah.
I would have to keep in mind like who raised him,
Right.
and what beliefs was he raised within, instead of like trying to poo-poo him as an adult and kind of be like, that's silly. Also because in this situation where he might feel really tied, like defensive of his mom because of the situations they've been put into by the government and the state and stuff.
Right. Which would be really hard, but I think just want to hit, like, I'm sure you two and anybody else who's a clinician on here has had clients tell them some absolutely tragic, heartbreaking stories of abuse or horrible events that have happened to them that don't even sound like they could be real. And they sure as shit were.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's the other part where I have a problem with the way they demonstrated the mental health side in this, is that they did not at all show any deference to, just because it doesn't sound real doesn't mean it can't be. Now, granted, there's a line. So the amount of cover-up, they make sure that we are shown that governments and private companies did to cover up the existence of Terminators, that there was very much proof of. That's Cameron knew what he was doing when he wrote that script. Of like, and we're going to make sure that we show corporate overlords and governments conspire to suppress people's stories of things that are scary for the general public. But that shit's real too sometimes.
Yeah.
So looking at like the number of conspiracy theories in government that are absolutely wild, but some parts of it are true. Like, what's the study that Stranger Things is all based on?
The Montauk Project. Yes, or have I read stuff about that? You bet your bottom dollar. I have.
Right. What's Montauk is one word for it. What's the other one?
I think it's where it took place. Is Montauk, New York.
it was Agent something or other or something, but
I'm Googling it right now.
where they were actually they were legit studying psych ops and the impacts of hallucinogens on people. Mm-hmm. Like, those things are real. So they don't sound real, but they were.
No, it's called the Montauk Project. It's a conspiracy theory of government projects conducted at Camp Hero.
It's not the word I'm thinking of.
But no, I was like, I ate that shit up. One thing you need to know about me as a kid is if there was something about conspiracy theory or about ghosts, haunted Ohio, if you will, where I'm from, I was eating it up. I couldn't get enough of the occult section of my local library. And I'm also scared of robots, which I think I've brought up before.
Yeah, I think you have.
You have.
But I mean, just kind of closing the loop on Sarah. I mean, we see a lot of the trauma. I think a really good example too of the trauma is one of the scenes at the end where when she goes to Dyson's house and she's trying to be like a big bad Terminator type, and she sees his wife and his son, and I think that's re-traumatizing for her, of seeing herself be the abuser in a situation that was so similar to her situation.
Right.
And she crumbled. Like, she literally like almost went catatonic, like hit the wall, fell down the wall, and just kind of stayed there until John and the T-100 showed up.
Yeah, the acting she did was great on that like freeze response, that look she did. Yeah.
She does a few of those, like when they find her at the hospital initially and she's on the ground, like she freezes there and freaks out when they comes out of the elevator. Like, it's interesting because that's the thing she's really scared of. So in those moments with like the T-100, that's when she like freaks out and runs and freezes.
Yeah.
But in every other situation where I think she feels more confident, I'm assuming because of the skills she's acquired, then she's in a fight mode with those, which makes sense when you think about, like we've talked about before, like trauma responses can also be influenced by how competent you feel like you can get out of the situation or fight through the situation.
Right.
Yeah. And so I think you see her, she's a good example of how you're never just one. Like, because people do that as well. It's like they talk about it like it's a personality type. Like, I'm a fighter when I'm trauma, you know what I mean? Or it's like, it depends. You can
depends
fluctuate
on the situation
between them. And so the movie does a good job of showing that she's not just one of those things.
Yeah.
Right. She doesn't just go into, she's not all fight. Yeah, she does have more realistic responses. Like, when she's confronted with the things she's actually terrified of, she doesn't respond with the way she's rehearsed it in her mind.
Yeah. Which that's
4 million
real.
times. That is real. I think that degree of fear, the last time she saw the face of Arnold the T-100 was the scariest moment of her entire life.
Yeah.
And to have that again, no matter what you've rehearsed, but particularly to encounter it in such a vulnerable position. She rehearsed that with, I will always be armed. I will always have weapons. I will always be these things. She did not rehearse that mentally with her being barefoot in a mental institution.
Wearing like the softest clothes imaginable.
Yeah.
Like no coverage.
And
very vulnerable.
Right. At that point in time, carrying a tongfar. Like, what are you going to do against a robot with a wooden stick?
Yeah. I mean, she doesn't have shoes on.
Nope. And so her response to that, given that situation, was incredibly well done. And I'm glad that she had that part, because Linda Hamilton struggled with mental health herself. She was diagnosed with bipolar in her 40s.
Oh,
and her family had struggles with it too. And mental health is very real for her. So her depicting it accurately, I think, was something she did a phenomenal job of.
All right. Well, we'll take another break here and then we'll talk about John. All right. So John is, I think the first thing I noticed is he is a surprisingly resilient kid.
Yes.
Like, he's actually very grounded given all the stuff going on at his age. You know, he's very adaptable. He does roll with things. He's very empathetic, personable. all the things that he doesn't have, those responses that we've been talking about. Like, he runs away, but that's seems like normal kid behavior, if nothing else, even.
Yeah.
And he follows his training.
Yeah, and he follows his training, but he doesn't operate like someone with PTSD the way that Sarah does.
No.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. Which I find very interesting.
I don't think John would have PTSD.
I could see, being raised in that environment with a mom who's like,
well, yeah,
constantly telling you horrible things are going to happen, and then taking you around a bunch and being around people who are like heavily militarized and stuff like that, though they seem very communal.
Right, but John wouldn't have had something dramatically taken from him except when his mom gets taken.
Which seems to have happened frequently.
Yeah, that's happened off and on, but other people like contesting her reality. I don't know if PTSD would be the direction. Like, it's possible, but he definitely doesn't present with it.
Yeah.
Well, and I feel like, and even we hear him say, I just thought that this was normal behavior. I thought this is what families were like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like this. Like in these places where you have to make sure that you have weapons, and you have to make sure like somebody might be after you. And like he says that. Mm-hmm. So he just thought that was normal.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So the only time that he finds out it's not normal is when he's in foster care. But he does seem resilient. He also seems very much independent.
Yes.
Like, he really doesn't need anyone else, which I think makes a lot of sense for a kid in his position.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which can be is a product sometimes when I've worked with kids who have been bounced around a lot from caregivers to caregivers, is they can have a very, I always get these words mixed up. Is it disinhibited or inhibited when you're like more insular, pulled away from others? Oh, I can never remember the difference.
Disinhibited would be people who engage inappropriately.
Okay, yeah. So he's like when I would work with kids who had gone through a lot of like bounce around, caregivers, stuff like that. Like, sometimes we would be monitoring, like, do they exhibit, are they like too far on one spectrum or the other? But he doesn't seem like he's very like on the inhibited type either, because he does have relationships like his friend, and then he does, like, he's very loving towards those people at that they go visit, that family they go visit. It's kind of like south when they go south, which it seems like they had a very loving relationship with him too, very familial, and the way he gets attached to Arnold. But I think one thing I wanted to point out, talking about John, is right away you see that he's a kid who is very savvy, very street smart, if you will, like way more than street smart, criminal smart. Yeah. Like I remember thinking that ATM thing he does in the beginning of the movie was like some of the coolest shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, right? Like, how do I do that? I want to, like, I need that machine, man.
Yeah.
Money.
And also that was just a good callback, good story writing.
Yes.
Because like then he brought that back later in a clincher moment. So just from a storytelling perspective, like, it was very good. And also I think when I used to work,
we said a T100. I just couldn't let that go. Sorry,
it's okay. T100.
No, it was a Model 101 of a T800.
What? Okay. But I think when I used to work in partial hospital programs with kids who had been in foster care a lot, kids who had been involved in like gang violence and just lived in like harder positions. And I think something I had to learn really quick as someone who's raised pretty sheltered and pretty, like, be quite honest, like suburban white environment, was how to not be so shocked, basically not like pull like a shocked, like sheltered, like country girl face when kids, because I'd work with kids who were like 9, 10, 11, his age, who would talk about shooting a gun, having a gun, knowing people who have done heinous crime, like really severe crimes, and it just being like rolling off their back, like not a big deal. And when I first started on that work, I'd be like, oh my God, like, I could see the shock on like the other interns' faces or whatever. And I think something I had to learn really quickly, and that my colleagues who had been doing it for longer than me is just like, it's just very normalized. Like we were saying, like, you know, this kind of behavior, it's not because this kid's antisocial,
right,
or they're a little baby criminal or a little baby psychopath, or like all the horrible judgmental remarks people can make. It's just like, this is life for him. It's like, it's just normal. It's like going out to like play baseball, you know? And so to treat them, to judge them as if there's something almost like bad seed, like abnormally wrong with them because they engage in this kind of behavior is, well, it's just, you know, usually racist, but like, it's just very uninclusive, you know? And so I think he's actually a very good demonstration of normalized criminal behavior in a very young person. Like he's 10. 10's crazy young. He seems like he's more like 12, 13.
Yeah, he does.
The way he's riding that dirt bike and stuff.
Yeah.
Yep.
But to be 10, but like I said, I've worked with kids as young as him that have lived more life than I had lived by the time I was 20, 30.
Oh, more life than you live now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some of these kids out here and what they've been through, it's unimaginable. And also, like, ignoring the way they've been socialized is chronically ignored in case conceptualizations.
Yeah.
Where people who come from survivalist mentalities, or people who are taught how to live on the land, or people who come from military families, people look at that and go like, wow, that's fucked up. Their parents are training them for that, but their parents also lived that reality. And they're training them from the standpoint of the world they understand, which is what all parents do. And it's one of those things, yet again, where which way is right? Well, it depends on which context we're looking at it through. If this is somebody who might be living a life in the country far away, like, yeah, they might, as a matter of survival, need to use guns at the age of 10 or start learning how to shoot, or that's just part of the culture there. And it doesn't mean that they're a little criminal. John's world is different because he's being brought up amongst survivalist people, and as he details, and Sarah, I think, details in some of her monologues, like, she attached to people who were these survivalist nut jobs. I think that's John's words.
I think he might have said something like that, but she also said, oh, maybe he said it too, that she would pick dudes, like stepfathers pretty much, based on their ability, like the skills they could bring to to John.
Yeah.
And she wasn't really picking men who would be like good fathers for him. That's like neither here nor there.
Right. Right.
And so if you think about that, that's the background he's been raised amongst, you know. I think they do a good job of, in little ways, showing that. Like the fact that when the elevator, when the liquid Terminator is piercing down on them, she runs out of gun ammo, and T, like, instinctively hands her another magazine, as if he was counting the shots almost, and knew as soon, like, she didn't ask for it. She didn't even signal I need more bullets. He just instinctively knew she's out. She'll be out. Here's another one. And I think the movie does a great job of those tiny moments that I think would be very, like, you would see in real life with a kid like him.
Yeah.
And so you just have to keep that in mind when working with a kid like him, that that's just part of their living situation. And you don't have to, you just don't have to treat him like he's like, whoa, like very like wild, or poo-pooing it, or just like really othering him about that stuff.
You'll get nowhere if you do.
Yeah.
You can't untrain somebody the way that they've been trained. Not quickly, anyway, particularly if you get kids that come out of the cults, or kids that decide that they're going to leave a plain religion or something like that. It's going to take quite a long time to let them figure out that the rules of life are different in a different version of society. But it doesn't mean that they have to give up all of their skills, all of their identity, all of the things that they're good at, all their resources, in order to be good enough for the new environment. And oftentimes, a lot of pathologizing is done of one viewpoint or one way of life, that it limits the child's access who is leaving that life, voluntarily or not, to have resources and things that make them feel good about who they are, that makes them then feel they're not good enough, and they'll likely seek to get back to a place where they are accepted. And treatment goes better when they are encouraged to share what makes them them and not shamed for being different.
Because you can definitely see the way that his foster parents regard him is they definitely have that he's a little criminal energy towards him.
Yeah,
Yep.
they do.
And they've very much decided what kind of person he is already.
Yeah.
Horrible foster parents, in my opinion.
Yep.
Yep.
No, because I think you're bringing up a great point, which is when you're thinking about a kid like John, you have to almost think of it like culture, like a culture change.
Yeah.
And so
Absolutely.
what you're doing is you are asking him to radically assimilate, and then you're punishing him for not knowing how to do that.
Yeah.
Because I think what's different about John than even the kids that I used to work with is the kids I used to work with were from down the way. Like they were in the neighborhood I was working in. So they were still had a lot of like quote unquote normal situations, like they still be going to church or the school or whatever. You know what I mean? John is the kid, like I think cult's actually a great way to think of him, is like he has been separate from society.
Yeah.
Civilization for
Yes.
most of his life. And so the idea, and I think a lot of people do this, a lot of adults do this, which is you can just pluck them out and put them somewhere else and then just expect them to roll with it and then judge them when they can't.
Yep.
And I think what I try to do, or we would try to do with someone like John is like you were saying, Ben, like utilize their strengths, because he is smart as shit. Like,
Yeah.
he is smart. He's resourceful. He's clever. And he seems like he works on his bike. Like he's very mechanically smart, like he's genius, a little bit genius in a lot of ways. And so there's so much opportunities to take a kid like him and take him to like a mechanic shop, you know, or like have a hobby with him that you would do with him and really pump up his strengths to make him feel more invested in the society that you're asking him to assimilate into. Because you're right, Ben, like you're going to force him to assimilate. You're going to judge him for not being able to just inherently do it. And then you're going to be shocked when he wants to go back to the place in which he feels connected and empowered and also like smart
And accepted.
and accepted.
Yeah.
And people do this all the time. I talk all the time with adults about like, we have to stop projecting our experience, our adultness also onto other people, especially children, and then punish them for it. And that's definitely, you see with the little snippets of his foster parents, like I wouldn't be shocked if like that's what's going on in his household.
Yeah.
They like do not understand him. They don't want to understand him.
No, they don't. They don't. They want to see him in the way that they've got him put in a little bit in a little pocket, and they want to let that be simple and easy. And unfortunately, that happens to kids that have been in difficult situations that encounter mental health and police world and any other part of the system, right? Like be it foster care or social workers at school. Sometimes people refuse to contextualize where these kids come from and allow it to be a complex viewpoint, and they just decide that's who this kid is. That they're, oh no, there's like all these other little criminals out here, and you're like, well, hold on. John's story, so much deeper than that. But even the little criminal kids, things that people make up, like it's extremely rare to find people that actually have conduct disorder.
Like a genuine bad seed omen type character.
Right. Like it's really rare. What's usually much more of an accurate viewpoint is somebody is angry, somebody is hurting, somebody is struggling to get their needs met and doing it in the only ways that they know how to keep themselves safe and have their needs met. And they don't trust things because they've watched things go bad. And then sometimes they end up turning to people who they believe will keep them safe, which can go tragically. But for people to just assume like, no, these are little psychopaths, like, well, hold on.
Well, and also too, with a situation like John, I would assume that he was not raised by a typical parent.
No.
And they weren't.
He was
and
raised by Sarah Connor.
And he wasn't raised with like a parent-child dynamic. So also, like how frustrated his foster parents are with him, I'm like, this is not a kid who is used to listening to a parent in that way and just being compliant. And then also, what is making your bed? What is cleaning after yourself in the world in which he was raised? Like you were saying earlier, like about Sarah, like that stuff is meaningless to her. So of course, I'm sure it's meaningless to John.
Yeah.
So then you're punishing him on things that he never even took into consideration as important. And then you're not thinking about the fact that this is a kid who's probably not used to obeying adults in that very traditional sense.
I am sure that he was raised by, I mean, Sarah's raising him to be a commander.
And she's also raising him to believe that he is this leader.
Right.
So also, why would he listen to adults if he's going to be like the next Jesus?
Well, but adults who don't, who aren't in the know.
Yeah.
Like, you guys are all going to die. And it's like when you see people who are part of religious cults and go like, well, I don't need to take you seriously because you're all going to hell anyway.
What were you going to say, Anna?
Sarah also has PTSD.
Yeah.
So she's also raising someone out of fear and raising him to be, to live through anything.
Yeah.
In a very specific way. And so he hasn't had, it's kind of surprising. I don't know what you guys will think about this, but in some ways it's kind of surprising that he doesn't have like attachment disorder stuff.
He would feel like a kid who would be diagnosed with not radical. Is it? Yeah. No, I'm thinking of RAD, which is reactive attachment disorder.
Yeah.
Which would shorten as RAD. So that's why I think of radical. Yeah, you're right. Like he does. I mean, I guess
especially if his caregiver has changed that often.
Yeah.
But also if he had to learn how to rely on himself at a very early age, that might be why he is the way he is, maybe. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, I think I used to work with a lot of kids that would get diagnosed with RAD. And so, I don't know. We talked about this with Matilda as well, in that I think some kids just are naturally resilient and they can kind of get out of the situation without RAD. I would say some of the things he displays that are RAD-ish is how quickly he gets attached to the Arnold character.
Yeah.
You know, and that's something that I would see with kids with RAD where they would be like, tell me they love me within like an afternoon.
Yeah.
And like want to hug me and be up all on me, you know? And I was a stranger. But I would say, I think what feels different, the movie of it all, is that this is a heightened situation.
Yeah.
And so like, I don't even want to shame
That's
him
what
for
I was going to say.
Because also he just seemed, I think he feels, because what he does feel for me is just like a typical kid in that he just so very much wants a parent who just takes care of him.
Yes.
And he wants it so much to be Sarah. And if it can't be Sarah, then maybe it can be this guy. And not, like I said, not in a way that feels like uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And he doesn't seem to be like pushing people away. Like we don't see a lot of his dynamic with his foster parents, but that's hard to judge because they also seem like assholes. And so
yeah,
he could very much just be reacting to living with a bunch of assholes.
Yeah.
And so we don't know what he was like in his other foster homes. He seems very loving towards those people that, like I said, that family that they meet to get weapons. So he doesn't seem like a kid who is lashing out to like, or like pulling away.
Yeah.
Because even in the situations with Sarah, he just wants her to be his mom.
Right.
And there's so many great little moments as well. It's amazing that they just found this kid at like the Boys and Girls Club down the street from where they filmed, or in the area. Like he's a local with no acting experience, because he plays such a good job of like being, you can see in his face, like in the moment in the car when he thinks that she's hugging him because she misses him and she's scared for him. But really he starts to clock right away, because he's very savvy, that she's checking him for wounds, because she's doing that thing she does where she goes into that like, you are the top priority mode. Mm-hmm. It's an ironic sort of thing where she's so idolizing of him and everything is so centered around him, and yet it's in this detached way where he's actually ironically not getting what he needs from her.
Yeah.
Even though everything she's doing is about him. Because it's not really about him as a kid, though. It's about him as an adult. She's not seeing him as a child. She's seeing
Yeah.
him as his future self. And so she's checking him for wounds because she wants to make sure that the future him is safe, not him now.
Right.
And he has an emotional reaction to that instantly, and he knows that he can't be emotional with her or vulnerable with her. So he turns around, he starts to cry very quietly, and he says he's fine, which I'm sure he's done a million times before.
Yeah.
He seems like a kid that is always getting his hopes up about her.
Yeah.
And he feels a lot like kids I used to work with who had parents who were struggling with addiction, where they would be in groups that I'd run, or they'd work with me individually, and they would be like, I don't know why my mom or dad can't stop doing drugs for me. And just get their heart broken over and over again. He seems like that kind of kid, where he gets it, like intellectually what's going on, because he even says like she's a loser, she's crazy. Like he seems to have absorbed that information and trying to roll with it.
I don't think he believes that.
I think he's trying to, which I think that's also part of, I think, his resiliency. Like I think he's trying to live.
Yeah.
But you can say like he wanted to, he's disappointed by the guy she would hook up with. You know what I mean? And he was disappointed in her that he finally found a guy that he liked, that was nice to him and taught him things like normal stuff. And he goes and she did her regular nut job stuff and pushed him away. And so he is still just like a typical kid in a lot of ways, of just wanting consistency, wanting his mom to be available to him, and wanting his mom to be with him now.
Yeah.
Not be preparing him for this future.
Yeah.
And so in a lot of ways, he feels very grounded to me. And like I said, like very resilient.
Yeah.
He is. And you see it with kids who come from situations where a parent is so fixated on their potential to be some version of themselves in the future, like you're going to be a doctor, or you're going to... Sports parents are among my least favorites. I was going to come out with that. Sometimes kids are, going to make it. Other times you're giving up a whole lot of life and childhood and parental sanity.
And your weekends. Oh, and your mornings.
And everything to foster this identity that isn't acknowledging the reality of statistics.
But their kid could be an Olympian, Ben, God damn it.
That there are 30 professional baseball teams with 25 players. And that's it. And that's it. But looking at the way those kids are raised, they're fostering this entire identity, and they just want their parent to view them as a kid.
Yeah.
They want their needs met, and their parent is looking at everything of like an investment or a... No, you're gonna make it, and you're gonna be a pitcher in the big leagues, and you're gonna be the one pitcher that gets that like $300 million contract, and you're gonna be able to take care of the whole family forever. You have generational wealth, and they go like, I'm a kid right now, and like my feelings are hurt. And kids can't stop being that, but parents who are so fixated like Sarah can't see it, and it is damaging, and it is hard to see when kids step away from that how much those messages still impact their sense of self, even when they step away from good or bad versions of that it is a challenge. And I think you see John's resiliency, that he's going to keep moving his life forward no matter what's happening, but at his core he still wants his mom.
Yeah. I think going to what you were saying too earlier about him being raised with a parent with PTSD, I think that's real, because in the very end of the movie, well, one of the end scenes when they're at the Dyson household and she's catatonic and she's upset, she's like weeping, he comforts her. And that felt like something that's happened before.
Yeah, it did.
And I think that is, I think he feels mostly like a kid who's being raised by a parent who is ill.
Yeah.
And maybe ill's not the right word, but just suffering from a mental health diagnosis. And I think with kids like that, they can present very well, which I think he does for the most part. But then they can grow up with anxiety, people pleasing, kind of like hypervigilance kind of stuff, where if you raise having to take care of a parent, that you don't just shake that as you get older.
Yeah.
You know, I work with adults where I have to talk, where we have to work on like that kind of codependent kind of energy because they were raised by a parent who needed them too much or needed them inappropriately. And so then as an adult, they have a lot of anxiety about like if they have a partner, like every time their partner is having a hard day, they're like stressed.
Yeah.
And because there's no trust that the person in their life can like take care of themselves. So if someone in my life that I love is having a hard time, it's my problem to have to figure out.
Yeah.
Or you have to be, you know, hypervigilant, like I said, where you have to be hyper aware of the moods of people at the house, which I'm sure Sarah, if nothing else, I'm sure she's moody as shit.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he like, as soon as he hit the living room or wherever they were staying, I'm sure he was taking the temperature of the room.
Of course.
Which makes a kid that's very savvy as well. Like I think
Absolutely.
Like I think he feels like a really savvy kid, and I think he'd be a kid that would unfortunately either be judged as like a little criminal, like we said, or a kid that wouldn't be given as much help as he needed because he has acclimated, quote unquote, so well.
Yeah.
And then as he get older, this stuff would pop up, and then that kind of thing.
Probably. I think the other thing I want to talk about with John and look at, but we should probably take a break before we do that. So maybe we'll do that first.
All right.
With someone like John, we talked about it a little bit, but John shows a remarkable retreat into training throughout this film. Particularly, I guess, the reloading, but you see that the reloading things take place when they're on the highway chase. Any of the car chases in particular, like Sarah and John have a set cadence and rhythm that they have rehearsed, and once the danger gets validated as real, everything Sarah ever told him was the truth. All of this like anger and frustration with her that he had left.
Yeah.
He was compassionate and empathic towards her. He had some anger and disappointment with her, but a lot of that, like she's a loser, like that stuff never returns for him. Well, he is 10, so I'm sure he's also just so happy to be with her. In whatever context. He's also getting shot at.
Yes.
So survivor stuff is turning on, but like, everything she's ever trained him for, now he's no longer questioning any of it.
Yeah.
And he's retreating full on into the identity she trained him for. And we see his resiliency show in ways that happen to soldiers, because we forget that these soldiers that we train, we send them for training when they're somewhere between 16 and 19 years old on average.
Ugh, that's so grim.
It's the truth. It's the truth. And these people sometimes then go out and get deployed to combat situations. And they have to retreat into training, much the same as John does, that the danger is real now and you're either going to live or you're not. And here are set things we have taught you to do when the danger happens, and right now you don't have time to think about anything else. So you dissociate away from all of your needs, all of your age-appropriate things into a version of you that can survive. And when you have set resources to follow, training shows up. I talk to people who get shot at all the time. As a weekly or daily experience, people who either have been recently shot at or have been recently in dangerous situations, and over, all the time, they will discuss the retreat into training that happens. The automatic movements that start to come that you have rehearsed thousands of times. And you see John and Sarah do that with, John is just loading weapons and handing them back. He's not even thinking about the fact that...
in the car, he's very, like, on it.
Especially when they're in that, like, truck, and, like, Sarah's got him behind bulletproof vests, and, like, she's shooting back.
Yeah.
Out of whatever, I don't know if it was an ice truck or whatever that was.
I can't remember, but I know what you mean.
Like the SWAT truck.
Yeah, a SWAT truck. That's what it was, a SWAT truck.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even when they're being, like, gassed when, you know, like, Arnold's on his, like, minigun scene of, like, just, like, lighting up the entire Los Angeles PD. But hurting no one, following John's orders. Firing weapons that shoot 2,000 rounds a minute. It seems difficult to achieve. But looking at how well we see this 10-year-old just go like, okay, when you're being shot at, you take cover, you reload weapons, you hand them to mom. You don't do anything that puts yourself at risk, but you contribute to the battle effort. And I think that's a really important point to consider when you're talking about the need to validate people's identities when they found strength and resources. Maybe his mom probably has given him positive feedback, and he had positive relationships with her, developing that rapport that's spontaneously emerging when the actual situation he's trained for emerges. That even if it doesn't, or even if it's not real, it's going to be part of his identity and something that made him feel connected to his attachment figure. And if you as a person who's working with him tries to take that away, he's going to push back, resist, and shut you down and not listen to a single thing you have to say.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else about John before we move on to treatment? All right. We'll take one more break here. Hannah, would you like to go first?
Sure, I would love to go first. So in the magical world where Sarah and John are in my office
doing family therapy,
that's the world that we're discussing at this point in time. And what I think would be really important is to help reestablish the parent-child dynamic. And in some ways, in a lot of ways, that's going to be teaching Sarah how to do that.
Yes. She has not raised a child.
No.
She has not been a mother.
Yeah. I feel like for John, I think he would already know the role. I think he would also be able to help Sarah learn a little bit more about how she can be a mom versus a trainer. Or
he feels like a kid who could tell her, like, this is what I want from you as my mom.
Yeah, absolutely. And helping her understand that her role as his trainer has been so important for such a long time for so many reasons, and really validate why that has been something that she's experienced, but also that a part of what John needs from her now is to be able to have a parent that where he can be a child, where he can experience some of the, I don't know, any of the things that are left for him as a child, which might not be that much, to be perfectly honest. But I think what would be important is helping them find a dynamic that feels more comfortable for both of them. Because I would imagine Sarah's going to be pretty uncomfortable playing a mom role, only because she hasn't had practice at it. And she hasn't really, for whatever reason, I mean, I think we know all the reasons, we've been talking about them. She won't be able to, she just doesn't connect to John in that way because she's so focused on him surviving and becoming this, like, freedom fighter person. And so I think I think will be all different kinds of ways to help Sarah and John. And I think some of them are just engaging in some natural, like, play of some kind, but also maybe playing some games together where they can also learn a little bit more about each other. Because I think Sarah has put him in a very specific place in her mind. And I think that because of that, there might be a lot of parts of herself that she has not shared with him. That could be more maternal, or that could be just sharing information about how she grew up or what her experience was like, or really anything like that. And so there's a couple of different, like, questionnaire games that we play that I think would be helpful to help them get started with just learning a little bit more about each other, but also to help Sarah share that part of herself with John.
Yeah, because he talks about how he wants to know more about his dad, like his bio dad, and how he knows that there's more to the story because he catches his mom crying.
Yes.
And he's interested in that. That's his story too. And you're right in that she needs to get to know him as a child.
Yeah.
Like, what he's wearing a Public Enemy t-shirt. Does
Yeah.
he know what bands he likes?
Yeah.
He likes Guns N' Roses. Okay. He likes Guns N' Roses. We've covered this because Guns N' Roses is prominently featured in that whole chase scene as. Yeah. Yes,
He also likes Public Enemy.
he does. That's not. Yep. He's from
but I
L.A.
mean-
in '91. He likes
So
Public
a-
Enemy.
Yeah.
So a question game would be something that's asking these
Yeah.
kinds of questions, where it's like, what's your favorite record? What's your favorite movie? What would you do with $1 million? What would
Yeah.
you like? Very much just open-ended,
Like the Endgame.
curiosity.
Like the
Curiosity.
Endgame. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because she doesn't know him as a kid.
No.
That's been moot. A moot point. So I think that's a great point, Hannah. Yeah, this would be definitely, I'll just piggyback on yours. This would definitely be, because I think I've talked a lot about how I would deal with John as a clinician, as a child therapist. And I think what you were saying, this would be in a perfect world in which there were no repercussions
Yeah.
from the situation legally, which they could be together and there were no
Yeah.
fear around
Yeah.
that relationship.
Yeah.
They would be someone that I'd want to have wraparound services where they'd be getting a lot of therapy at once. Like
Yeah.
Sarah would be getting her own therapy. John would be getting her own therapy. She would probably be getting parent coaching. And then I think maybe John would integrate into that care.
Yeah.
Because you're right. Like she doesn't know how to be a mom, a typical mom. And also I think she would need space to process that situation, like the family therapy with John.
Yeah.
And he would need to process it. I mean, it's just like a wild dynamic. It makes me think of, clench yourself, Ben. It makes me think of Daddy Butler and Bruce Wayne and how we talked about how they would need therapy
Yes.
to talk about their dynamic because they're having such a wild dynamic shift to give a little kid what he needs.
Yeah.
And so Sarah and John need that too.
Absolutely.
And she needs to learn how to unclench
Yeah,
as his mom.
I think Sarah, I think some of the work would be where I kind of split them up and talk to them separately sometimes.
Yeah.
Where sometimes with Sarah, we're just going to talk about how to help regulate her emotions in the moment. I mean, again, in the magical world, she's already getting individual therapy.
And you'd probably be collaborating pretty closely.
And
with
I'd
her
be
individual
collaborating
therapist.
really closely with any other mental health providers at that time. And so and honestly, I really feel like they couldn't come to me until they had both done some work.
Yeah.
Maybe not necessarily John as heavily as Sarah, but certainly until Sarah is able to regulate her emotions in some kind of way. I think just because it would be so uncomfortable talking about this part of herself that she hasn't been able to connect to.
Yeah, she hasn't been a vulnerable, because I think what's so different in the first movie is she's such a happy-go-lucky, regular schmegular 18, 19-year-old. And so to her to have to go try to reintegrate that part of her and be vulnerable and open to him, like that dream she has where she's at the park with him
Yes.
and she's loving on him.
Yeah.
And yeah, it would be a lot of care at once, ideally. And it would be really interesting what she could tolerate. But I think you're right too. They would be someone where I would give them homework. Between
Yeah.
this now and this now, I want you guys to go play a basketball game together.
Absolutely.
Or go to a movie. Or cook a meal. You'd give them things to do.
Yeah.
To build up that dynamic.
Absolutely.
And not just be see you next week.
Yeah,
You want to
yeah.
give them things that build
Yeah.
a relationship outside of sessions.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I don't have anything else to say.
All right, Ben.
So when I was thinking about treatment for them, when I was in grad school, I wrote a paper in my existential class on Sarah Connor because I really, really like the Terminator franchise in some ways. In other ways, I have some serious issues that we can talk about later. But the thing I chose existential for Sarah for is because working with her from any other standpoint doesn't make sense to me. Because she knows a reality that I can never, as a therapist, reassure her isn't coming. And where my problems I just said I wasn't going to talk about with the Terminator franchise come in is that there's literally no reason for her to ever believe that machines a sentient AI that we couldn't even fathom in 91 what they can do now would ever stop trying to send people back. Why would she ever believe they'd stop sending things back? If they thought about it once, it's not like they expended all their resources. The machines could build more machines. The entire premise that they could stop this is nonsense. It's more likely doom. It's coming for you. It's more when than if. And working with her from a standpoint of how do you control what you can control, and work on not being in a state of constant anxiety against everything, but be more fluid and building your capabilities to respond is the only thing that makes sense to me. And that being said, I think as a supervisor, I hear this case and go, wow, how do we factor in prognosis into conceptualization? Because for someone that has concretely had her worldview proven to her that I am in danger and has never varied from that and never not been in danger really since someday when she was 18 when a machine tried to kill her and some dude from the future showed up and said, come with me if you want to live. That how do you factor in getting getting her to believe that at any point she's not in danger when some future AI believes that your child, born to you of this dude who said, come with me if you want to live, is the future of all mankind, that's their worst enemy, and the machines don't stop, they don't sleep, they don't rest. They will never stop coming for you.
Yeah. I mean, once your mind has been blown like that, that's real. Like your mind then you're open to the idea that your mind could be blown like that again.
And it can be, and it will be, as we've seen by the multiple sequels, that there is literally no end to this fight. And the story can be retold in 100 different ways and just rewrite itself over and over, which is where it stumbles. Mm-hmm. And they go, this idea would be cool, but how do we make it make sense within the timeline? Well, time travel is a really tricky thing that nobody can ever get right narratively because it's impossible, except for Quantum Leap, where they tell it in vignettes and then one thing never connects to another, except that he's the common thread. That's it. And he can only temporarily possess people to fix them with white man powers. But looking at the reality of how you help a client like Sarah, I think the only thing that you can do is like work with her from her standpoint and understand that you're never going to prove to her that this isn't going to happen. And it's not going to serve you or her to try because she knows it's real. And the same thing happens when you have clients that struggle with the clinical word we have for it is religiosity, where they believe full on rapture's coming and they're going to be part of it and other people aren't. It's pretty similar mentality of how do you build up their resilience to get through the things that have always been true, which is that your death is coming at an unspecified time. You don't get to pick under the best circumstances. So a Terminator coming from the future to end it is really no different than the metaphor people constantly use of what if you get hit by a bus tomorrow? What if an air conditioner falls on your head? What if you get struck by a random bullet? What if you get in a car accident? The context and the scope and the scale I recognize are different when it's you have to keep your son alive so that the human race has a chance to survive. But looking at these kinds of cases, it's really important that you recognize what can be achieved so that you and the client aren't beating your heads against the wall or they're just leaving the office feeling unserved. You have to stay within their worldview and offer them help from what they want. And I think Sarah is such a challenging case because all of it's real. Mm-hmm. So it's like, how do you do counseling with somebody that's got to go back to an abusive relationship they're not going to leave? How do you counsel a person who's going to be living in a war-torn country? You're going to see stuff. Or an ER doc try not to use police all the time because that's part of my world that I counsel police officers, but nurses, ER docs, you think they're not going to see horrible stuff every day? What are you going to do? Tell them, no, it's okay. The world's going to make sense tonight. Your shift's going to go okay. And they know that's not going to happen. They're going to come in with somebody with a 2x4 sticking out of their neck and then have to sit with the family that's screaming for them to help when there's nothing they can do. And that's going to be there Tuesday. Cases like that, understanding prognosis and reasonable expectations is really important, and communicating with people that you can give them a place to talk, a place to build a relationship, and then looking at how do you make meaning of all this? How do you make meaning of your life in this, and how do you release yourself from the anxiety of trying to control everything and control only what you can is about the best thing you can do. That's all I got.
All right. We'll take our final break here and then be back for our final thoughts. All right. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. I like this movie. I hadn't really watched Terminator movies until the pandemic, I think.
And you were stuck in an apartment with me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's when I watched them. So I don't know. It was fun to watch. It was kind of an amazing portrayal of somebody who has PTSD in a lot of different ways. And yeah, I enjoyed it. So I don't know if I could promise that I would watch it again, but I wouldn't be against watching it again.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That makes sense.
I don't feel like it would be a movie you would watch on your own necessarily.
That might be true.
But I don't think
That's a
you would
good
be
one.
like, ew, if someone was like, can we watch T2?
Yeah, I agree.
And that someone's probably me.
Probably.
Because I can go next. This is one of my favorite movies.
Yeah.
I don't know when it became my favorite movie because I remember I have a very distinct memory of being like 6 when it first came out and being so upset that my father rented this from the video store because I didn't want to watch some gross boy robot movie. So I don't know when that tide turned for me that I really liked it. But I've liked it for a long time. I think just it felt like, you know, when you watch something when you're young and you're like, this is a movie. Like you start to like recognize cinematic beats. So like the scene in the mall in the Galleria when he's chasing when he's running away John, and the one Terminator Arnold comes down and he has the flower box and then the other one shows up. I remember that in my brain. I was like, whoa, this is a movie. So I think I just thought of it as like so cinematic and it like blew my little mind. So yeah, this is one of my favorite movies. I don't watch it a ton over and over again, but I do every once in a while. I remember it and then I want to watch it. So I'm excited we're finally doing it for the podcast. But yeah, it's definitely a rewatch for me.
I love Terminator 2.
Hell yeah.
I love Terminator 2. I always have. I think the first time I saw it was at a lock-in in Boy Scouts. I almost certainly should not have been watching this movie, but because I would watch like the TBS version of Terminator and Terminator 2, and like, holy shit, do they sanitize the crap, or they did back then. They sanitized the crap out of it. Like, you don't realize how violent, particularly the first one is.
I've only seen the first one like 3 times, which is weird given how many times I've seen the second one.
Yeah, like Bill Paxton gets his like a fist basically like through his body, like it's bad, and the Terminator like carving his the eye out and stuff, like all this. It's But watching like the real version, the R-rated one on the two VHS with this one, I strong memories of this movie. It's so good. The first one was good, but it's like an 80s horror movie with Lovecraftian robots, basically. Otherworldly things that are bigger than you, like. But then seeing this movie, this one's so good. It's just so good. It's always good. It's good every time. It's good today. The effects are good today, and that's why it won an Oscar, because the special effects were so good. They don't even look tacky now.
Yeah, they're not bad. Like,
Agreed.
you definitely can.
Agreed.
The liquidy stuff looks very 90s.
Yeah,
but it doesn't look bad. Like, it's not laughable. It just looks out of the time.
Right,
Yeah.
right. It looks of the time. It looks ahead of the time, even. And watching this one is something that I feel like you can turn this on at any point in time. It holds up. The existential dread of knowing that people won't believe a doomed future is coming for them, even when it's on their doorstep, and that people will be actively building towards it. I think that dread is something we feel now, like watching AI grow now. It's like the number of times I think in my head when I see people talk about putting guns on robots, have you seen Terminator?
Yeah.
Did we learn nothing?
Yeah, like I won't even engage with like a Snapchat just had like this new AI function where you can talk to an AI, your AI, and I refuse.
Yeah.
I was like, I did not give permission.
Because we're going to teach the robots how to think like us and then form hunter killers and robot skeletons that, you know, I don't know why robots wouldn't build nanobots to just destroy us from the inside. But anyway, the reality is that this is a fantastic film. It's going to hold up for years. It's held up for years. It continues to do so. It's one of Arnold's finest. It's one of like the best performances by a new young actor I've ever seen. And Linda Hamilton kills it as Sarah Connor. It's such a switch for her to have turned from like this 18-year-old damsel in distress to like full-on warrior. And despite the problems with the sequels, we discussed earlier that Terminator 3 just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
We don't
It
discuss
has been
that.
stricken from the record.
It's been stricken. You got the one with Sam Worthington and Christian Bale probably deserved more.
I like that movie.
I forgot what that one was called. Revelations? Something like that?
They all have like Revolution?
Something
God.
some of them are.
I know the remake reboot was called Genesis.
Genesis was bad with Matt Smith and yeah, that one was bad. And then
Terminator Salvation.
Salvation was good. And then Dark Fate I haven't seen yet because
I haven't
need
seen
to.
it either.
We
Maybe
should
we
watch
need
it.
to have like a movie night because Hannah wants to watch that one.
I do.
That's the return. But like watching so many things like Sarah Connor Chronicles was good at first, and it demonstrated a lot of these things that we're talking about where like Sarah never does let it go. She never can because more Terminators keep showing up. Are they good or bad? Who knows? But they keep showing up, and even the one that's good and ridiculously attractive Summer Glau that John falls in love with because why not? She never trusts it. And I think that's where like the prognosis thing comes in, is how do you ever trust that anything is what it says it is if it's coming from the future so it knows what you did? You can't win. So the mythos like kind of stumbles on itself when they make it overcomplicated. I really wish honestly they would have just stopped with T2. Like we won, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
a little bit like kind of Star Wars of like, we won, the end. But Terminator 2 was an absolute perfect film, and I think I would watch it 100 more times. I didn't even have to watch it to do this. I've seen it so many times.
All right. Well, we will sign off there. As always, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Popcorn Psychology, Twitter at popcorn_psych. You can always email us at popcornpsychology@gmail.com if you have any recommendations or questions for us. We have a Patreon linked in our Instagram bio. If you would like to become a patron, you get free access to, well, not free access, you're paying for it, but you get early access to unedited episodes. And we also have other privileges if you wouldn't be a patron. We also, if you go on TeePublic, we also have merch there if you are interested. And as always, please find us on wherever you listen to podcasts and rate and review us. It's the best way for other people to find us. Thank you, and look out for robots, y'all.